About 10 years ago, we also noticed that a number of the filmmakers whose work we had screened early on were starting to become considered experts in their fields. And so we developed what we call our Filmmaker in Residence program. That program brings a person who's recognized by their peers each year as having a quality body of work. We invite them to come to the festival, to spend time with us, to show some of their past or present work, and to be just generally a filmmaker who's available to talk to everybody. They also do a master class and really try and teach not just the next generation of filmmakers, but anyone interested in film. Last year, our filmmaker in residence was Josh Sheftel. Josh is a really interesting guy. How many of you have ever seen him on CBS Sunday morning? You have. Yeah. So Josh is not just a feature filmmaker of documentary features. He made a narrative feature. He's made lots of different kinds of work. And the space that he's working in now is kind of a hybrid space of online, on-screen, short and long form. And he's had a really interesting and varied career. He's been able to do that at a time when people were trying to say, well, who are you? Like, they wanted to pigeonhole him in the filmmaking world. Things have changed since that time when he started making his first feature films. Now it's much easier to work in the hybrid space. It's much easier to make what they call short-form content. It's much easier to get things seen by a broader audience. And so a few years ago, he and his group in New York started making a series called Secret Lives of Scientists and Engineers. How many of you have ever heard of that? Well, millions of other people have. And he was here last year and shared some of those episodes with us. He also, his group has made something called Secret Life of Muslims. How many of you have seen any of these episodes? Well, that's awesome. These have been fantastically popular. They have had a mega outreach effort with them. They have been really spread, not just in this country, but worldwide through the effort that lots of people are making to get the content seen and known, and really try and use this to develop a narrative, to develop a way for people to talk to each other about issues that have seemed to be a barrier between us. The other thing that we did a number of years ago is start thinking about what we're doing as a festival in terms of where we fit in. The film world, we know, is changing, and so we try and partner when possible with other organizations who are kind of working in the same issues that we are, and the same area that we are. And Charlie Sennott, who founded and developed the Groundtruth project, has been working with us for a long time in many iterations. Charlie is a world-renowned journalist, but he started this organization that really is, and he'll talk more about it, trying to do many different things. But part of what they do is provide content for major media outlets. And they do that by developing it with lots of emerging filmmakers. And so it's a really interesting thing that they're doing. The Groundtruth project is based out of WGBH, but it's a separate organization. And we've been working with them for a long time and really hope to and look forward to do more with them. So it's a really exciting opportunity for us to grow what we do, to expand what we do, to recognize the fact that there really are no boundaries anymore in terms of how people get their information. And so we invited Charlie to come here today to talk to you. Well, Josh wanted to be here, but he couldn't. But we are so thrilled that Aman Ali is here. Aman is the subject of one of the episodes, but he is also a filmmaker, a comedian, a person of importance in his own right. And so he came here to talk about and to help us look at the series, talk about the series, and really talk about the issues in the series. And we're going to have a conversation, and I'm going to turn the mic over to Charlie, and you'll talk a little bit more. But they're going to talk, we're going to look at some screenings, and then afterwards we have time for questions.
Okay.
If you have not been in this particular space before, the restrooms are through that exit and down to the next floor. If you need to leave at any time, you're welcome to use the back door. And please turn off your cell phones if you have them. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy.
Thank you.
I would take a minute to say a real thank you to you, Judy. This is an amazing festival. The vision you've had for this festival from the beginning is extraordinary, and we're really proud to have been part of its growth and its iterations and how you think things through. One of the filmmakers who Judy works closely with and who's been a big part of the festival is Beth Murphy. And do you all know Beth? How many of you guys? She's sort of a cult figure. I'm really lucky, proud to work with Beth. We did a film, first work we did together was called The List. It was Beth's film, and we worked together on a small, short film iterations of that film for the web. And it was kind of prehistoric efforts at something that has become a real art form. We then worked with Beth on her film about a girls' school in Afghanistan called What Tomorrow Brings. How many of you have had a chance to see that? Really proud to have been part of that, and Groundtruth Films emerged out of that experience, and we now have, as part of the Groundtruth project, Beth is the director of Groundtruth Films. Groundtruth's mission is to support a new generation of journalists to tell the most important stories of our time. We think young journalists need support, so we created a nonprofit to give them funding, to give them support, and as Judy said, we then partner with PBS Frontline or The New Yorker or really online news organizations, whether that's Huffington Post or BuzzFeed. We'll partner with anyone who shares our editorial standards and will let us do the work that we think matters the way we think it matters. And we've had great luck. We've won a lot of awards. We've done a lot of great work. The young journalists we work with are extraordinary, and I want to really encourage all of you, if you would, to follow us. Get on our newsletter, go to Groundtruth. It's the groundtruthproject.org. Really would love you to know what we're doing and be on the journey with us as we grow. About the fifth line of our mission statement, we say, we cover divided societies and struggling democracies. So that for a long time meant we were in Egypt, where we worked a lot on Tahrir Square and the Arab Spring. We did that with Frontline, and we worked a lot in Burma on the struggle for their democracy there, and a struggle that continues in both of those places. But in the summer of 2016, we realized, divided society, struggling democracy.
Not here.
We live in one. So we decided to triple down on national reporting. We've done a lot of global reporting and helping young journalists do that. Now we're really, really excited about trying to help young, emerging journalists here in America do the really important work. So we've started a new initiative that's called Report for America. It's Teach for America for Journalism. We're trying to be as idealistic as we can. With the President of the United States referring to journalists as the enemy of the people, we think we triple down on our work, we triple down on our commitment to that work, and we just triple down on our idealism that a free press is a cornerstone of a democracy. And we're just gonna keep focused on what we do, and I love the words of Marty Baron. Marty Baron is the former editor of the Boston Globe, where I worked, and he was my boss. And he's now the editor of the Washington Post. And Marty Baron said, when someone asked him, aren't you at war with the White House right now? And he said, no, we're not at war, we're at work. Love that. My career is like 25 years of journalism in the Middle East. I'm proud to know many Muslims. And this film is an extraordinary journey into bringing all of us into the idea of some of the absurdities we have around notions of what is Islam, what does it mean, what does it profess to be to the people who believe in it, and how is it viewed by those who are watching it from the outside. I haven't watched every single one of the films in the series, but I've watched enough to know I love it. It's really creative, it's really smart. I'm proud to be on stage with Aman, who's an integral part of this film, and who, I want to learn more about him and about the films. And what we thought we might do is just show you two to start. We'll take a break, and we're going to kind of see how you're dealing with those two, and then we're going to go into 4 more, which is 4 short profiles. Take another break, and then there are 2 last films that are really sort of a call to action or an invitation to engage with people around you who are Muslim, and how you can do that and what that could mean for all of us. So I just want to say, Aman, thanks for being
Sure,
here with
yeah.
us. It's awesome to have you.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate you guys. Yeah.
You're a stand-up comedian.
I am.
You live
I
in
am.
New York.
I am. I do indeed.
You're a filmmaker. You're working on a film.
I am indeed.
Tell us a little bit more
Sure.
about what you're working on right now.
Yeah. Before I get to that, a quick intro for me. You know, I grew up in Ohio, right in the middle of Ohio, and where I went to school, I was literally the only like non-white person in the entire school. So like during school plays, I either was Squanto the Indian or Martin Luther King. Those are like my only choices for like auditions. Those are the only two roles I could get. So I was always that guy that was always like explaining things, right? Like we'd have a movie in class and someone would be like, Aman, what's that guy saying? Can you translate? Can you translate? I'm like, that guy's Mexican. And he's speaking English. Like, so I think very naturally I was just that person that was not only explaining, you know, me being born and raised in Ohio, child of Indian immigrants that practices Islam, but I found myself as receptive to other people's narratives because I always had to explain my own. I was always a lot more receptive to other people. And so it naturally just put me on this journey to become a performer and a storyteller where not only was I talking about my own experiences, traveling or growing up in Ohio, traveling all over the world as a performer and learning things, but hearing about other people's narratives as well. And I guess my little claim to fame was a couple years ago. This was 2010, I believe. At the time in New York, there was a polarizing issue about a group of Muslims that wanted to build a mosque by where the World Trade Center is. Well, controversial according to the news, even though City Council voted 35-1 to support it, President Obama supported it, the mayor supported it, but one or two bloggers fixated on it. You fixate a lot of cameras on it. It creates the impression that this is now in worldwide hysteria. And so it became this thing. And so instead of replying to that, I was just like, well, there needs to be more narratives out there about the Muslim American community. And so at the time, my buddy and I that I was hanging out with, we just had this crazy idea. I was like, wouldn't it be crazy if we literally just got into a car and we drove to a different state every single day, telling stories about the American Muslim community. And so we launched this project, 30 Mosques in 30 days, and we're very fortunate to have the fine folks at PBS to support it. And literally, that's what we did. We went to every state in America, just telling stories. We're not here to preach religion, convert, or any kind of like, we don't see ourselves as activists or even religious figures. We just want to tell dope stories about who people are, about their different walks of life. And so naturally, it's led me on this journey since then, realizing that there really is a hunger for narratives, especially from people of color, people of different faiths, people of different backgrounds. And I not only wanted to tell my own story, but I wanted to amplify other people's voices as well. So it's led to this where I did a lot of short form content, and now, as Charlie mentioned, this feature film that also working with PBS on. And we're actually in production on it right now, and it's about a Muslim casket maker in New Jersey that got so fed up with street violence that he wanted to do something about it. And so he's literally pulling young boys off the streets, and he makes them wash bodies, build coffins, meet mothers that have lost loved ones to gun violence. So through the lens of death, it's teaching these boys that their own lives are worth living. So our film is following a 12-year-old and a 17-year-old learning how to become men in these spaces. We've spent the past almost 3 years with them as they mature into adulthood and just kind of understanding the nuances. Instead of us talking about kids and us talking about the kids are lost, the youth, and all this stuff, we wanted to give them a space to tell their own stories and really actually understand things from their perspective. And so yeah, we've been busy on that. And yeah, it just, as I continue to travel and talk to people and be involved in projects like this and other ones, I just quickly realized that there's a genuine hunger and an interest in these stories of nuance, because I feel that we live in a society now where whoever shouts the loudest gets the most airtime, right? Whoever screams the loudest, and there's really no nuance or understanding of people from any different backgrounds. And I've noticed that on the ground there's this hunger, and it's kind of motivating me to be involved in projects like this and other ones.
Thanks. I can't wait to see the PBS film. When will that be out?
So we're still in production. It'll probably be, it's slated tentatively for broadcast release around this time next year. Okay. So yeah, be on the lookout for it.
Sounds amazing.
Thanks.
So let's dive into the secret life of Muslims. So we've got, as I said, two films we're going to start. One is a kind of 101,
Yep.
or like, what is it to be Muslim?
Mm-hmm.
And the other one is about the hijab. Any other setup you'd want to share with?
Those are the main ones. I think the way we pick this order is kind of the questions that a lot of people have, kind of getting those out of the way, and then we can get into the fun, interesting narratives about people's lives and where do we go from here, the things that we're really, really hungry for. Like, we know the 101 stuff, so we kind of get that out of the way and kind of have a little bit of fun with it. But yeah, we can just go ahead and play the clips if you want to play the first two.
We'll dive in. You know, I'm thinking of my work. You know, really, I've been lucky. I've traveled in almost every Muslim country in the world. I've predominantly Muslim country in the world. I've had a chance. But why is this necessary? Why do we need to understand the secret life of Muslims?
I think that's an excellent question, and I think as our country, especially here in the U.S., becomes more multicultural and more embracive, it's important to get these narratives out there. I think right now, it's hard to get exact numbers, but the rough Muslim population in the U.S. is between 3 to 6 million, and it's on pace to be the second largest religion in the U.S. By 2020. So it's a growing demographic, it's a booming demographic, and there is no one cultural narrative. There's no Middle Eastern face of Islam versus an African American or South Asian or white American. It comes from all these different backgrounds, and so I think as more and more people encounter Muslims, it's important to get these narratives out there. It's an exciting time as well because up until the longest time, you know, for most of our lives, you know, we got all our information from a handful of TV networks, handful of news outlets and radio stations, and that's where we formed all of our opinions. And many of those organizations were, to be blunt, run and organized by old white men. No disrespect.
I'll take the white part, but the other part I would be greatly disrespectful.
But naturally, and that doesn't mean anybody's racist or this or that, but naturally, you need people from different backgrounds to tell their own stories, right? In my opinion. You're not required to, but it helps to have more people in those conversations, people of different genders, different backgrounds, different sexualities, and different upbringings and experiences to get these narratives. And so what happened is, in this huge proliferation of social media, streaming platforms, and all these news platforms, instead of relying on the big networks and the big studios to tell these stories, now there's all these opportunities for people to tell their own stories. And so that's why you're seeing people just kind of fed up and like, you know what? They're not going to do it. Let's do it ourselves. And so Josh, the director of the film, about almost 2 years ago, I was at an event, and we hung out, we were chatting, and then a few months later, he started bouncing around a couple ideas, and he says, I want to do this series about the secret life of Muslims. And around the time, this was around the time that Trump was still running for president and had just announced his proposal to ban Muslims from coming into this country. I don't know how that works. Is there a bacon test that I have to eat it or not eat it to get in? I don't know how that works. But that was the plan. So naturally, just by default, we were forced in the national conversation, right?
Right.
People were like, well, Muslim, what is a Muslim? So rather than letting other people, I've always been of the view of rather than letting other people tell our own stories, we should tell our own stories, right? Or be involved in that process. Let's have a say in that matter. And that's people of any background. And so that's kind of how these ideas started. Mm-hmm. And what I really liked about working with Josh, as opposed to, because he directed his production, like it was all him. Like I wasn't involved in the making of it. I was in front of the camera. But what I really enjoyed about it was instead of him having a point of view and saying, okay, we're gonna do this and that, he says, okay, we want to talk about this, but do you want to talk about this? Or is there anybody else we should get for this? So he was very collaborative. Mm-hmm. And I really, really liked that because he recognized, he's a pretty smart, culturally savvy kind of guy, but he recognized that even as a white Jewish man that lives in Brooklyn, that there's going to be some gaps in his level of nuance and understanding. And I like that he acknowledged that. And what we did is work with him, and he got other people involved, and he made it a very collaborative process. And I think that's very important that any storyteller, whether you're a journalist, a filmmaker, a director, whatever, you acknowledge the biases that you bring to the table, right? And acknowledge those openly. And that doesn't mean that shouldn't prohibit you from doing anything, but acknowledge those and make conscious efforts to address those in your work. And that's any kind of work. And so I really like that approach. And so we filmed in the studio, and he just started throwing a bunch of questions. And I didn't really take it seriously. I was just like riffing. And then he said, okay, that's good. I was like, oh, we're gonna start filming now? He's like, oh no, we're done. Like, I was just like goofing off about like pork on my fork and like this. I was just like, just being stupid. He's like, no, that's great. Let's put that in there. I was like, okay, are we done? He's like, yeah. And so I was just like completely like just BSing with him, not realizing he was filming. I thought we were doing like a really long sound check. And he's like, yeah, we're good. I'm like, okay. And then 30 million views later, like here we are, you know. It was really crazy, the impact. With these things, you never know.
Let's come back to impact. Yes. I want to do that after we watch the profiles, but I'm interested in that 30 million number, 30 million people. That's great impact. But let's maybe dive in on the next set. Is that all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what would you want to say maybe to set these up? We're a series of profiles. Anything else you'd want to share?
I think it's important with the approach as storytellers is we're telling stories about human beings who happen to be Muslim. These aren't Muslim stories. You know, a lot of these experiences are not unique to any group of people in this country, right? I'm an awkward brown kid that lived in Ohio, but many people from different walks of life had, when they bring their mom's lunches to school, they're like, ew, what's that? Like, nobody has a monopoly on these stories. And so it was important for us to, once we get past the 101, the identity stuff on the surface, the show and tell science project stuff, we get into these stories that make us human, that are not exclusive to any group of people. And that's the next series of stories. And I don't want to set it up too much, except the first one. Mm-hmm. This guy, Rais Ahmed, just has an incredible story. Was a victim of a hate crime after 9/11. And what he did in response to it was just absolutely incredible. But yeah, we can go ahead and start with his if you want.
Is that, oh, I could keep watching. I just want more. They're so great. God, what a great set of films to keep us all honest in our relationship with people who are Muslim. You know, the defining moment of September 11th it was an attack on our country. It brought out a lot of hatred. I think because I've lived in Europe and I've lived in the Middle East and I really covered 9/11 very closely from Afghanistan, from Iraq. I say this often. I want to ask you if you think it's true. I think America does better than most countries in the world at dealing with Islam. That we're a pretty religious country. Like, it's a pretty religious place, especially if you go into the middle of the country and you deal with people for whom church is so central to their lives, right? So I think of the world as like these axes that divide us that I wish we could get rid of, but maybe we can't. There's the left-right one, so maybe that's like whether you're more conservative or capitalist, and over here maybe more left-leaning and socialist. And then there's religion. There's like, are you religious or are you secular? And in that axis of divisions, I actually think sometimes Americans who have faith are more connected to Muslims who have faith than maybe they are to Christians who were raised Christian but have no faith. And I don't know, I picture us all on a big bus. We're all really hot and sweaty. And I actually think we have a lot to talk about with each other around religion. How do you feel? Is that a perception you've had in your own life? Am I wrong about that?
I think you're right, and I think that's something I struggle with. Is I feel like we often don't give our country enough credit for how embracive and how pluralistic it is. Because again, I think the narratives. Again, these are racism, hate crimes, anti-religious violence, and bigotry. These are real issues affecting many people across this country. I find though that we need to find a balance, because yes, we need to bring awareness and talk about these things, but sometimes we fixate on these things so much, people think, okay, this is the norm. This is everything out there. So when we fixate on a mosque being vandalized or someone being beaten, as young Muslim kids, when I see this as a young kid in high school at the time, I'm like, oh, well, this must be the norm. I thought about running for office when I grow up, but maybe not. Maybe it's not safe. Maybe it's not a good idea for me to do this. And so I think it's challenging because you don't want to sweep these things under the rug. You want to bring awareness to it, but you don't want these narratives to dominate the conversation. When in reality, they're not. When you travel around the country, most people don't really have any kind of positive or negative. They don't have any opinion about who Muslims are, who Muslims aren't, or this or that. They're just like, all right, whatever, like,
right.
whatever. Like,
right.
we live in a country of whatever. Like, all right, what do you believe? Whatever. Like, you're not hurting anybody, fine. Like, go ahead and do whatever you want to do. And so I think that's where I struggled initially was, yeah, I want to talk about these things, but I don't want to be seen as a poor, feeble, like helpless individual that's a victim of this and that. And I also don't want people to, I don't want Muslims to feel like, oh, every non-Muslim is bigoted, every person is racist, every white person feels like this or that. Like, here I am, and it made me realize the own biases I bring to the table. Like, oftentimes, I always assumed that people were being prejudiced towards me, but I was often being prejudiced towards them, thinking that assumed that they were racist, assumed that they were bigoted. If they had a question, I just assumed it came from a place of ignorance. No, they were just curious. And so
right.
I do think it's important, to your point, is to really take that time for understanding. And I think the cool, going back to what we were saying before about this cool, with all these era that we live in, is all this cool content. Now there's no excuses. You may have never met a Muslim, but everybody has a YouTube channel, everybody has a Facebook account, everybody has a television, Netflix, like, these things are out there, right? And it's cool to see, you know, with Ahmed's story, he's talking initially about how the only roles that he could find at the time were terrorist roles, right? But that's no longer the case. You know, Master of None was an amazing show on Netflix that won a couple Emmys. And it's about a guy who comes from a Muslim background. He's not really practicing, but it doesn't matter. Like, he's just a guy looking for love in New York. And it was written and created and directed by a brilliant comedian, Aziz Ansari. And so now people can, instead of waiting for other people to give us roles or to give us opportunities, we can create them. We can create our own roles. And you're seeing many people fed up and frustrated. In the Black American community, you know, there was very often a negative theatrical portrayal of Black women. And now you're seeing an influx of amazing stories from Issa Rae, who's an amazing director and comedian. She has a show, Insecure, on HBO. And so people from different backgrounds are creating their own content. And so that's really helped in this era we live in. But yeah, I do think in this country, there is a pluralism that is often taken for granted. And I think that has to do with because, again, we live in an era where whoever screams the loudest, you know, gets the most airtime. And I'm sure when people, I know when Rais, we posted that video, people said, like, where was this story? Like, how come I never heard about this? Like, this is amazing. Because it's not sexy television. He's not screaming on top of a building, burning anything, or damning someone to hell, or like throwing something at a building, right? He's not looting anything. He's a very calm, reserved, nuanced individual that's talking about his struggles. And I think that's why you often don't hear about these stories is they're just not sexy television, according to certain producers and editors. Like, oh, nobody wants to watch this, but clearly people do. People are hungry for this, and it strikes a chord. And so for me, I've always been of the mindset of, instead of just complaining about these things, let's do something about it.
Thanks for doing something about it. How are we on time? I want to be sure we get to your questions, but we have two more short films.
Yeah, let's show the short films and then the questions.
Okay, let's do that.
So yeah, going to the subject of doing something about it, here's two very different narratives of people that just kind of got fed up and were just sick of complaining and wanted to do things in terms of making a difference in fun and creative ways.
Okay. It's fantastic. I think we'll have a big breakthrough as a country when Dunkin' Donuts sponsors
I know, right?
the sitcom
Absolutely.
that Reza's doing, and they are featured. No, congratulations. What a great film. I'm eager to get to your questions.
About 15 minutes.
Okay, so should people, with small enough room, we'll just stand up and ask? Is that, no mics, okay. Anybody have a question? Yes, sir. I got delayed on the bridge with you. It was.
So my question is, you said 30 million, and how do you get these wonderful films out into the world?
Great question.
Yeah, so what the folks at Secret Life of Muslims did, they partnered with a bunch of different news outlets. So Vox ran a few of them, USA Today picked them up, CBS picked them up, and so they syndicated them across a bunch of different platforms. And then separately from all those news outlets, there was a YouTube channel and a Facebook channel as well. And so people saw from pretty much anywhere and everywhere, all these different places. And that was cool because people were finding from so many different places. It wasn't just like one place where everybody went to watch it. Because that's the community we live in, is like when you hear about some viral video, like you might have saw on the news, you might have saw it on your phone, like you might have saw it, like heard it on the radio, you might have seen it at some guy's house, you know? So people were seeing it from anywhere and everywhere. And I think that's what they wanted to do, was really just get this in front of and as many different people and platforms as possible.
Great question. I might,
30 million.
yeah, I was going to follow up on the 30 million. Is that, explain that number a bit to us. That's total audience reach?
Yeah, I think it's total number across all the different,
Okay.
so like Facebook, YouTube, like the cumulative of all those.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Great, amazing.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, related to that, I mean, if we wanted to see some more of these, where would we go? Where would we
Yeah, great question. So you could go on Facebook or YouTube, just search for Secret Life of Muslims. There's a separate channel for those. And everything, all the videos. So you saw 7, I think there's like 5 or 6 more. And we're actively filming season 2, actually this month. And so we're working on that, going even deeper into these issues, going beyond just the personal narratives and talking about some of the more fun stuff. And so we're going to continue down this path. But yeah, YouTube and Facebook are the best places to find them.
Do you need any more volunteers to be interviewed? Because I have 2 women that call me mommy, and they're from Afghanistan.
Oh, wow.
Muslim, and they're living in D.C.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Cool.
Is there a way to share stories online that might interest them?
And so that's one thing they do as well is through this platform, what Josh is really cool about is he wants to make sure that it's not just his team telling stories about people he's meeting, but using that platform as well to share other people's stories. And so that's been really cool, is seeing the videos that have been shared where people are inspired to record their own and put out their own content. And the messages we get, are incredible as well.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Is something like this going, or can it go to schools? Because that's the population that I would think you would also want.
Sure. It's available like I said, it's available online. Anybody can watch it, take it, do whatever they want with it. We've done stuff, I've done stuff with classes where, whether in person or telecom or Skype, where we kind of talk about what we watch. And I believe, I'll have to double check, but I think there is like a lesson plan that they've kind of crafted.
Cool.
And a conversation plan around it as well. So yeah, absolutely, there is a lot of education.
And is there a website where people, like, is it the same website where if you wanted to watch them
Yes,
all, or if you wanted to?
secretlifeofmuslims.com
Okay.
as well.
So you can check it out there. Yes.
So each of these segments, you have a vision. Congratulations on your larger vision of putting this together.
Thank you.
But what surprised you the most when you started this, or in one of those segments that you just weren't prepared for?
That's a great question. I'm always worried when doing things like this that, oh, we're just preaching the choir, everybody already agrees, and like, are we really doing anything? But what I really liked about it was, initially there was people that agreed, but it's like, all right, this is perfect because my crazy uncle is like this way, and I want to show him these stories, right? And so it became a rallying cry for people that wanted to be allies and wanted to step up and help and get the word out. But it was even cool, even if it was preaching the choir, it was people like, man, I'm so glad there's stories like this out here. And then there's people that were like, you know what, I've never met a Muslim before, but you've really made me think about a lot of things. Regardless of where you feel, we're not here to change people's opinions, but we want to force people to have an opinion. And you can't watch these videos and just be like, meh. You're forced to think about it. You may agree, disagree, but that's art to me. Art is something you're forced to evoke some kind of response. And that's what was really exciting, is I didn't really anticipate it had this kind of reach, where it was getting picked up by all these news outlets. We got nominated for a Peabody and an Emmy. It was just really cool to see just not only institutional response from it positively, but people on the ground that were watching it and really were excited about it, hungry for more of this. They really wanted to see more and more and more. So that was really cool.
Yeah, in the back.
You consider doing any of this in places other than the United States?
Yeah, and the audience was worldwide. I've done events. Like I said, this is what I've now make my career doing, is going around the world telling stories. So it may not necessarily even be exclusively through Secret Life of Muslims, but absolutely, like, the goal is, even though we're telling stories about the American Muslim community and these American Muslim narratives, so many of these things are universal. Hate is everywhere around the world, sad but true, but and it's important to get these narratives out there. And so yeah, they're doing a lot of events and trying to have more of a global perspective, especially with season 2, to talk about some of these issues that there's a lot of overlap, and there's a lot of topics of interest that go beyond just here in our country.
Do you have a question here?
I was wondering what has been the response from the Muslim community that you've been engaged with?
Yeah.
Has there been
It's been great because my prism since I was a little kid, anytime I watch something is that me up there? Like that guy or that girl? Like, do I know that person? And it's really exciting to feel for people to be like, wow, I feel like that was me. I was watching me or watching you or my friend or my homegirl. Like, I'm so glad to see that. It wasn't, even for the hijab thing, for example, why the hell do you need to hear from like a bunch of hairy brown men like how women should dress? Like, why should anybody but women themselves talk about themselves and their own narratives, right? And no person should legislate a woman's body or how they should dress or express themselves, right? And it was important to empower people in that. So I think that's what people are the most excited by is, wow, it's finally somebody like me is up there. That not just in a racial sense or even in a religious sense, but even just in a lifestyle or personality. It was important to be inclusive of that. And moving forward, continue to be inclusive of that. Is making sure that these narratives, like I said before, there's no one arching narrative of who a Muslim is, what a Muslim looks like, what a Muslim believes. So it was important for us to capture as many as possible as we could in the process. But yeah, it was really exciting to see a very overwhelmingly positive response.
I think we have time for maybe one last question. You had a question.
Thank you for all of these short films because they do break down some of the misunderstanding and wrong assumption that people have and they don't want to ask the question, but
Sure.
It's a very wonderful way to do the educational. The comment I wanted to make was about the film on Rais.
Mm-hmm.
I happened to be in Dallas when that tragedy took place.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a very good book called True American
Yes, read it.
by Girdhara Anand Girdhara that tells the story of the whole event. Very, very wonderful. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I think we're pretty much out of time. We haven't done.
We have time for like 2 more.
Okay, 2 more. Why don't we bundle them if that's all right? We'll hear from both of you, and then we'll ask Aman to answer.
Perfect.
It's really a yes or no question. Have you ever presented this to a room full of you yourself, avowed Trump supporters or people who
Yeah.
pretty much felt like going in, they hate?
Absolutely. So when Trump got elected, my agent called me and was like, yo, well, we got work to do. And so we literally went to the electoral map and I said, okay, I want you to book me shows in counties where Trump won by more than 30%. I don't want to perform at comedy clubs. I don't want to perform at theaters or universities where like-minded, liberal, whatever. I want to perform at VFWs. I want to perform at Kiwanis clubs. I want to perform, firefighter unions. Like I'm not making stereotypes, but I wanted to get into the community, right? I didn't want to just speak to like-minded people. And it was just so interesting because I thought, oh, this is going to be a hostile environment. Bring it. I got my, my one-liners and I thought I was going to argue with people or convert people or educate them about me, but there was so much that I was learning about them. And people made me think. I remember I was in Springfield, Missouri, and I think Trump won by 42% in that county in Missouri. And a guy came up to me, and very much a Trump supporter, had the hat on and rocking his gear, and he came up to me and he said, hey, you know how you're telling us to be a little more nuanced and understanding Muslims, that the guys screaming on TV are not the people that represent, you know, Muslims on a day-to-day basis. I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I said. He's like, well, I want you to do the same thing for Trump supporters. Like, yes, I voted for him, but I don't agree with every little thing, and I'm not this crazy racist bigot, this and that. Yes, we can get into, but what about blah, blah, blah. But it forced me to think, like, you know what? I need to be a little more nuanced in my understanding. Does that mean I condone and say, oh, they're just like us and this? No. But if I want people to take the time, effort, and energy to understand me, I have to give them the same courtesy. That doesn't mean I have to agree. That doesn't mean I have to normalize some points of view and things I may strongly, fundamentally agree with. But how can I expect people to give me that courtesy when I don't give the same thing to them? And so, yeah, we did like 91 events all over the country. And I just wanted to get in front of people. And it was amazing because we started just talking about spirituality. And people just really made me think about things. I thought it was going to be a very basic Islam 101, but we just got like really weird and spiritual, and like it was awesome. It was a lot of fun. Like, it wasn't hostile whatsoever. I was anticipating it, but again, these are these preconceived narratives that I have about people, right? And these are the biases that I bring to the table. And it was amazing that at least for those short moments, we were able to find not only common ground, but a sense of connection, a sense of humanity. I think deep down inside each and every one of us is yearning for. But it's hard for us to consciously acknowledge that. So it was really cool.
You got way more than a yes or no
Yes,
answer.
we did.
And a beautiful answer. Thank you. You have the last question.
Mine is just, have you thought of doing some films like this for refugees to look at, to give them a sense of the process?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I believe one of our episodes is going to talk a little bit about that experience. A short film that I highly recommend is a short film called Refugees Got Talent. It was really cool because it took place in Greece. There was a refugee camp where a bunch of Syrian refugees, to give these kids hope, they started a talent show. Very similar to America's Got Talent. And they use art, music, storytelling, dance as a way to express the grief and the trauma that they were going through. It's really funny. It's really lighthearted. It's only like 5 minutes long, but I highly recommend that. And yes, there is a hunger for these narratives, that people want to know who these people are and what their narratives and what this insane, you know, experience is like when your humanity, your homeland is ripped from you. When you have your life as a doctor, an engineer, whatever you're, even as a blue-collar worker, and now all of a sudden you're not welcome anywhere, and your family is ripped apart, right? And these are the things that we take for granted, just living in a very comfortable home with our children, our families around us. But when your identity and who you are as a person is stripped from you during these horrific circumstances, who are you, right? And so, yeah, there's a lot of great films out there. We'll continue, even in ours as well, to amplify them.
But I mean, films that would show to refugees that would help them
Yeah.
with the process. That
Oh, yeah. There's
once they've gotten here.
there's a great group, and I'm drawing a blank on the name, but they're in the Refugees Got Talent film. But they work with them to show them films, music, dance, theater, and all these things to help them reflect on their own lives and to help give them a platform and encourage them to create their own things. And it's cool in the film, not giving too much away, they actually created their own like mock news network where they were reporting on what was happening in the camps. And they would have these like little, like, they would take jugs of water and make these like mock cameras. And they would post it on Facebook after they were done recording it off the phone. So it was really cool. So yeah, there's a lot of work that's being done in this space. So it's really cool to see it.
Thank you, Aman.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.